is assessment in your course. And the second comment goes back to what I said the other day about this is a lot all at once. We've looked at 8 rubrics. We could keep looking at rubrics. And you say, okay, so now I need to design, carve out a piece, start small. Maybe this coming year you'll have a rubric for teamwork or a rubric for a presentation. And try to do 12 different rubrics the first time you use them. Okay? If you already have one for assessing presentations, you develop a second. Okay? All right.
Una pregunta. Ustedes en industrial que tienen el proyecto de grado bastante más avanzado, el proyecto de grado está el proceso muy definido, pero la rúbrica no está definida, ¿cierto?
Hay un formato.
Hay un formato.
Manejamos un formato durante la presentación por cada uno.
Y hay un formato.
Ustedes llenan una especie de encuesta para la evaluación del proyecto de grado.
Pero
no es exactamente
hay
el mismo
unos
concepto de la
criterios.
rúbrica.
No,
hay unos criterios que se llenan.
Unos criterios.
Cuando termina la presentación, los estudiantes se llenan. Y cada uno se va llenando.
No, la ventaja, digamos, entre comillas, es que como los profesores que se evalúan el proyecto de grado son también los que han sido tutores de los proyectos de grado, entonces saben cómo van a ser evaluados los estudiantes, entonces la orientación va
Y hay una rúbrica también para el tutor y para el evaluador del proyecto, para el lector.
Aquí sí que estamos lejos.
No, pero como decía De Gaulle, si no han sembrado los árboles, es momento para empezar y
No, es que ya empezamos, ¿no?
And when you're providing feedback, and we talked about this, okay? Provide frequent feedback. And every time they do something, doesn't have to have a grade. You're giving them feedback. You know, try to separate out the feedback that you give them from the grade, so that everything they do and every time you give them feedback, it's not attached to a grade. So they can look upon the feedback as something to help them to improve. So to do that, this has to be frequent throughout the term and be very prompt when you talk about that. Make it as specific as possible, and your rubrics will do that. They have to be specific because, and of course, for me sobrinos, they have to go through a lot of trouble because once when my sobrino Christopher was in primary school, now elementary school, he did a project and he showed it to me, and the only thing on this project was the letter A. And so, of course, you know, as a teacher, I'm not stopped there. And I said, well, why is that an A? What is? No, maybe it wasn't an A. Maybe it was a B. I said, why was this a B? Now, to him, it didn't make any difference. To me, it made a big difference. Okay, I wanted to know why that was a B. And that's the thing, that if it's an A, they don't really care to know. You give your students a C.
They ask why.
They want to know why it's a C. Why is this a C? Because that's the only feedback you've given them.
And they start to compare. I have almost the same text as my partner, and he has an A and I have a C.
So the clearer you can be, so that's why the specific feedback, which is why the rubric is so helpful. You did this and this and this and this, was beautiful. But you know, this part, you need to pay attention to.
Tal vez una reflexión para nosotros. A veces nosotros nos quejamos del utilitarismo de los estudiantes que solo se fijan en la nota, pero cuando realmente nosotros valoramos o les hacemos ver a ellos el valor de lo que significa, bueno, en el caso una A, una B, no, para ellos sacaste 5, sacaste 3, lo ganaste y...
No, y el problema no nada más, sino en qué puntos debe mejorar.
Claro.
Es la ventaja de la rúbrica que le dice al estudiante, mire, estos puntos lo consideré bien, pero estos puntos usted ha debido mejorar.
Gonzalo, completamente de acuerdo. ¿Cuánta oportunidad de mejora hay para un estudiante, para el crecimiento de un estudiante cuando uno le asigna un 3-5 y él se va y dice, ah, saqué 3-5, lo gané, pero qué bueno que él pudiera decir, mire, aquí en estos puntos realmente tuve dificultades y debo mejorar y debo trabajar en esa dirección? Sería una realimentación mucho más clara para ellos y sobre todo con muchas más posibilidades de que ellos pudieran seguir mejorando después de entregar la nota. Es que en muchos casos nosotros entregamos la nota y creemos que el proceso allí terminó, e incluso los estudiantes también lo asumen, cuando podría ser la oportunidad para seguir trabajando.
Para dar
mejorando.
feedback, un feedback
Correcto.
mucho más rico. ¿sí?
Nosotros lo hacemos
Uy, eso es...
en proyecto de grado, después de la sustentación, pues digamos que en el curso que me corresponde, pues, habría que implementar en otros ejercicios, pues digamos, pero ahí nosotros hacemos, los evaluadores me entregan las notas, yo hago el proceso de consolidación y luego le entrego a él el informe con el detalle del concepto, la rúbrica, esto fue lo que te evaluó, esto fue lo que vio numéricamente, pero este es el concepto que, o sea, reflexionemos por qué sacaste 3.5, ¿sí? Y lo hago con todos, finalmente el proyecto de grado no se evalúa digamos, cuantitativamente, pero él sabe cuál fue su porcentaje de nota y se puede ir a reflexionar en cada uno de los ítems, ¿no?
Sí, pero al final es lo último que hacen en la carrera y al final lo que importa
Claro,
es
pues,
sacar el
claro,
aprobado.
debería
Sí,
estar en todos los-
301, ya,
Debería
aprobado.
estar en todos los procesos, pero pues, digamos que sí se hace de alguna manera.
And this last point, I sometimes hesitate to even say that, but it's interesting to me that for many instructors, this was an important point to hear. You need to correct your errors, but avoid being sarcastic or condescending. And the problem when you say, well, of course, I'm not going to be sarcastic with the students. Students don't interpret sarcasm very well. They're young people, and we may think it's a kind of a little joke that we're putting on there, but they don't get it. You know, like, so if you write a comment, you know, like, what planet were you on when we did this? You know, I think that's humorous, and I would laugh seeing that comment on my paper. But the students don't find that funny. Okay? It's hurtful and they don't like that sarcasm. So we have to be careful about our comments because what, again, appears to us as, you know, a little bit funny or neutral is a little bit, you know, like, do you think you really belong at a SAISI? Again, you know, we're like, well, what's wrong with saying that? You know, really, you haven't been here. That, you know, questioning their whole right to be here. It's hard for students to hear. So I would say that putting it on their papers is not the place. If you want to have that conversation with them, don't attach it to their work. Call them aside and say, do you really think you belong at this school? You haven't been here for 2 weeks.
Have you ever taken to go to musician or to music or?
Más difícil todavía.
This is
The music
typical.
critics, you mean, or? Yeah.
Somewhere a professor says to me, okay, are you sure that you are not better studying music?
Oh, yeah. Yes, let's send you to music. But the thing is, if he had written that on your paper, tied to a project that you had just done, it's very different from him saying that to you, yes. How about studying music? Would you like to go to another major at this school? I think music needs you. So it's really, we have to be really careful. But certainly correct the errors. You know, don't avoid correcting their mistakes. You know, because you think they're going to feel that if their paper comes back with a lot of mistakes. That's your job. To correct their mistakes. Okay. If you're going to create a rubric of your own, 2 things you have to worry about: the criteria and the scale. So the criteria, you want to think about whether it's for a product, a process, a performance. Think about what does the good product look like? What does the good performance look like? Very specifically, what are all the criteria? Sometimes it's hard to come up with a good one, so I suggest think about a bad performance. Think about a bad product. You say, oh, this product is terrible. And I say, why? Well, it didn't do this, it didn't have this, it didn't have this. Those are your criteria. Just put them in the positive. So sometimes it's think about what a bad one looks like, and it helps you to think about a good one. Okay. But decide the criteria, the standards by which you will judge each product or performance. That's the criteria. Now the scale. Before I show you this, let me give you an example. How often, and I don't know in Colombia if they use this, but I say in the U.S. all the time. On a scale of 1 to 10, tell me, okay, so I'm going to say, on a scale of 1 to 10, tell me how good your lunch was today. You clearly know if it was a 10. Mine was a 10. Mine was a 10 plus. And it was a kiva.
I am cooking and President, they cheer for you.
Okay. You clearly know if it was a 0. You might know if it's a 5. But could you clearly distinguish your lunch? Is it a 7 or is it an 8?
7.5.
Oh, don't be an engineer. Okay? Because that's 3/4 away, and what you've done is you've made a 4-point scale. But between a 7 or, is it 70% good or 8% good? Is it 30% good or 40% good?
Could you reduce the scale then?
Too many scale points. Too many. Because you cannot distinguish 10 levels of quality when you're talking about your lunch. Okay? The second problem with it is that give me a label that describes the quality. And I would say you can't come up with 10 different scale points if you have to label them. And you don't, when I say label, yes, I can, because I had terrible, good, very good, very, very, very good, very excellent, the best in Colombia, the best in the world. I can't even imagine anything better. Okay.
You should also avoid that very good and very, very, very good.
Yes,
Because
try
that's
to
common.
avoid that.
Especially in polls and in interviews that is used. Would you,
Oh,
they ask you in a poll.
oh yeah, on a scale of 1 to 10.
Yes.
And they don't label them. They put from negative to positive, 10 little circles, circle one of them. They can do it, and they can answer it, and they will send it to you, but I'm going to tell you the data that you get is not valid, because you have no way of knowing how they're interpreting the levels on those scales. And it's not a continuous measure. Okay? So use only as many scale points as you clearly can discriminate and label, and that's why I gave the guideline of 3 to 5. I'm willing to say like 5 to 7. I'm willing to go to 7 if you can label them. Okay? And label them clearly. Because the next thing is that it has to be balanced. Equal number of negative with positive. Does it have to be an odd number with the fulcrum in the middle? No. You can use 4 to negative to positive. Right? But it balanced. And use commonly understood terms. We're going to look at some samples here. And the scale is within 3 to 5, and it's balanced. But it uses English words that we don't really use in English, and I'm not sure. Now I'll show it to you. So use commonly understood terms. So here are some sample scales. Quality, 4-point scale, poor, fair, good, excellent. Quality again, needs improvement, acceptable, good, should be comma, very good. Quality again. This is an attempt to show them very poor, poor, adequate, good, very good. Sometimes you just use 3, low, moderate, and high. All of those little scales I had you, those little boxes I had you fill out. Little or no progress, some progress, very good progress. 3 scale points. I didn't need any finer level of detail with that. Okay. Understanding. None. Limited, adequate, good. Meets the criterion. Now, but sometimes you say, for all the following criteria, do you meet the criterion or not? Do you meet the standard or not? Not at all. We saw this earlier. To a limited extent, to a moderate extent, to a great extent, to a very great extent. Again, oh, here's the one. Does it meet the criteria? It's developing, emerging, mastering. Okay, I already see you squinting and looking at that. Okay. 3 scale points. It could be balanced if we understood what the words are. These are not commonly used words. And so if I have to explain the scale to someone, like what, and for me the difficulty is, I can't clearly tell you the difference between if something is developing and emerging. Because to me, emerging means it's developing. So, but I have seen the scale used, which is why it appears on here.
Developing countries, emerging countries.
Yes, this is right. Isn't that how we describe? If we use that term for developing countries, we can call them emerging countries. So, and mastery is a sense of I'm developing, because I'm getting to mastery. Anyway, does not, and then meets the criteria. And here's the frequency one. Oh, I corrected it on here. Very often, but always. Okay, so here's some sample scales. And here's what we said before. Here's an example. Oh, here's a different rubric, but use it holistically. Sometimes I want to assess class participation. Again, it's hard to say, you know, how do you define class participation and to separate the criteria. So it's easier for me to look at as a whole. I will give you a very good if you attend. I don't think you have this one. Okay. All the way from, here's all the criteria, here are all the criteria at a very good quality level, and here unsatisfactory because of the criteria. So again, and for those of you who allot in your final grade 10% for participation, it's really helpful if the students know what good participation. So this is the holistic and this is the analytic. Criteria, each criterion is evaluated against a scale, whereas here all of the criteria are distinguished at 4 different levels of quality. All right, we won't do the exercise because I do want to talk a little bit, unless we have time to come back to it. But I will say, if you are using a rubric now, or you're creating a rubric, and you would like some feedback from me, email it. Don't put it in the Dropbox, because I will be gone. But just email it. Okay. All right. Oh, let me skip that and I'll come back to it. Let's talk a little bit about evaluating. Well, first, before we move on to that, other general questions and comments about using rubrics.
We have some examples for some kind of rubrics associated with outcomes or evaluation, assessment, learning strategy. But what is perhaps better to have some standard rubrics for outcomes? That is, we can use some set of rubrics for the outcomes of our engineering program, more or less generic with some differences, or rubrics for each specific course.
I think there's value in coming to some agreement about a standard rubric, for some things, about a standard rubric across the program. And the reason for that is for clarity with the students. They're used to seeing the same criteria. And I wouldn't do that for a lot of things, but I would do it for oral presentations. I would do it for teamwork. Some of the common ones. Products are often, and processes are often very specific to the course. But if you can develop one across the, you might, perhaps, but sometimes the projects are very specific. But you could work, it's possible to develop one. Because the more often, and the clearer this is to students, they're going to say, Okay, what's expected of me now in my oral presentations in my 4th semester, I know that it's the same. I can grow in that area because I know it's there. And do some standard rubrics. Certainly you could for some of the other general things like if you're doing journals or portfolios. Oh, my question is, as long as we're talking about portfolio, does that come up? I know it's going to come up tomorrow on evaluating the curriculum, but let me just start with, come back to portfolios, which is why I asked Alessandra, is that something you do within a course? We try to use portfolio assessment to evaluate the whole curriculum, the whole program, because my thought with it was that if I could list the program outcomes, all of the main program outcomes for telematics, at the end of the program, by the time students graduate, they should be able to collect everything they've done through the program and demonstrate how what they've done meets the program outcomes. So they would not create new assignments, but collect the ones that they did and write a short reflection on why they put that one in the portfolio and how it shows they've met this specific program outcome. And since this, you have to think about, okay, so now you have 60 portfolios or 70 portfolios from the students who are finishing the program. We didn't want now some poor instructor to sit with portfolios that stack to the ceiling and they have to read through all of these. So we said that part of the process would be at the end, students would present their portfolio maybe 15 minutes to a panel of instructors or instructional staff and highlight how they met the learning outcomes. And the main purpose of it was not so much to assess the student, they had already been assessed, but was to evaluate the curriculum. Because in looking across 70 students, if nobody could tell us or show us how they met a specific program outcome, it meant that we as a program area have to look at that. Either we weren't teaching it or we didn't have an assessment instrument that was fine-tuned enough to pick up some data. And we, at the same time, said, how are we going to implement this? We developed an entire orientation program for the faculty, for the students, and we said that we would give the responsibility to the student advisors, those who are advising the students, to help them to just monitor, because it meant that you had to make this clear to students as they started, so they would be saving all of that work. And the student's advisor, in addition to meeting with them to sign off on the courses they take, would at that point say, so how are you doing with your portfolio? What have you put in your portfolio? Are you collecting it? And we said to those we were going to start it with the incoming class, not all 4 years, start the incoming class. And for those faculty who were going to do this, we gave them a student assistant, a student advisor who would help them with that. So I thought, oh, I think we've thought of everything and oh my gosh. This met with such resistance. Faculty just refused to do it. And I can understand, to be fair to the faculty, in a period of 2 or 3 years, we had asked a lot of that faculty. We had asked a lot for them to be introducing into their classes, and this was one more thing. And they said, okay, we'll do it, but tell us what we can stop doing. But the hardest part for me, though, to accept, and I could accept that, was that the faculty said, the students will never do this. And I'd say, excuse me? These are first-year students. They're brand new coming into the program. And we say to them, this is a requirement in this program. Of course they're going to do it. Okay? But all it would take would be for one faculty member to say to a group of students, this is a silly idea, you don't have to do this. You know, this is this, and that's all it would take to, you know. So we abandoned it. So I considered that a personal failure. After all, I mean, we made samples of what the portfolio would look like. But in retrospect, so we abandoned that, and I took it as a personal failure. But the next time, I haven't given up on the next time, what I would do differently, I would not make it a curriculum evaluation. It's too big a project. I would start with one or two courses that already have a lot of the outcomes in that course. You know, I put it in Lorena's course. If Lorena were willing. Because then Lorena would make this a course requirement. So of course the students would do it because it's a requirement for the course. Okay. And they would demonstrate her. So it's now a willing faculty member. It's within a course, and it's already covering a good number of the outcomes. And then I would try to put it in, you know, an early course and the capstone course. And leave it optional for anyone else who might want to do it. And the other change that I would make is that it was still early in this whole digital portfolio kind of thing. And so I was suggesting, you know, let's solve the portfolio assessment piece first before we figure out how to do this, before we move into digital portfolios. Well, that was a mistake because I have to think of my audience. These are engineers. And they would be much more excited about doing a digital portfolio than something in a 3-ring binder with things on discs. So it's completely digital. So I think if we had solved that problem at the same time, it would have been better. So I think portfolios are going to be more useful, again, inside the course, as a course portfolio and not an entire program portfolio. Though conceptually it makes sense, in practice it's really hard to do. So you have it as a course.
Here at ICESI we have an electronic portfolio.
You do.
Nobody has ever used it like this. Next semester, 7 of the English teachers are going to use it like to assess students, and we can create a little worksheet.
I think the best example is the design portfolio for
Sure.
students. In design department and design career, we encourage the students to build a portfolio through his career with the first semester award, second semester award.
Because it's a traditional requisite.
It's a tradition in design.
Every designer has to.
The designer have not a curriculum vitae, the designer have the portfolio. Is the card of presentation.
Ya está metido dentro de la mayoría de proyectos.
Construir el portafolio.
Una vida
In developing a process, a course, is including build and format portfolio for the student, for the design.
And it's in the program.
But in engineering is normally, in engineering, we never do the portfolio.
Right. And this is what the engineers say. You know, the people over there in architecture and the people who are doing art, they do portfolios. We're engineers. Why are we doing portfolios? Or they would say, you know, they'll put together a portfolio when they're interviewing for a job. Well, it's a slightly different portfolio. Because if you're interviewing for a job, you don't put in all those assignments that you didn't do so well on.
And you don't put in all of your reflection about what you have not learned and what you have.
That's right. That's right. Okay. And you don't put in the rubrics that the instructor filled out about your performance. You know, so it's a different portfolio. But the problem with digital and electronic portfolios is the question of who has access. Okay.
The one
And
we have here,
who can you keep from having
they can,
access?
the teacher can have access with his student, just his student and the teacher, so we can have like little folders that
Right.
only he and his student can see.
Because you probably don't want future employers having access to those portfolios, because that's not the purpose of them. You know, so a lot of those issues about how do you put them online and secure them, which of course, you information technology people know it's very easy to do, but for me that's a big problem. Okay, so how now do you look at the course as a whole to tell whether this was a successful course this semester? And sometimes we know that intuitively. You know, you get to the end of the semester and you say, you know, this course really didn't go that well this time. And we just kind of feel it in our heart. You know. But this helps us to say, okay, can we take a little bit more objective look at what happened this time? But more importantly, how do we improve it the next time we're going to teach it? Oh, I didn't label this one. This is, do you recognize it? It's in the top. It's the President's.
Yeah, you labeled that one in your first presentation.
Oh, I did label it there, okay. And you see how clever, you see this little red blob? That's me. That's me.
Oh, that's a mirror.
It's a mirror.
It's a mirror.
That's
I
me.
thought it was a composition.
No,
The picture.
no, it's a mirror.
That's un Brian's mirror.
It was a mirror on the opposite building, so that's me taking a picture. Okay. Here's some different ways we can evaluate the course.
Mito.
Again, those famous money cards, they're pretty helpful, aren't they? They use them for a lot of things. So you can tell, you know, as you look at them across the course, at the end of the course, and make some decisions about, you know, this was a washout, they didn't understand anything from start to finish. And peer review, I'm not going to say any more than what's on here. There are institutions where we do this peer review. Instructors will evaluate other instructors about their courses, and sometimes they go in and sit in on classes and evaluate your teaching. Now, what is the problem with that? It's that sample size. They might come in once, and they're watching you give a lecture. That's a very small sample. That's not the, or they come in while you're doing a project and you're facilitating the project, which we all know now is teaching, and they'll say, you know, this person isn't doing any teaching. The students are busy, but the teacher is not teaching. But if you are going to use peer review, because it is good, because who understands more than your peers? But it's not a one-time come and see. It's a, look at my course syllabus. Talk to me about my approach to teaching. Look at the way all the methods I use. Look at samples of student work. Look at the assessment. Then make a judgment about the quality of my course and the quality of my teaching. Okay? The sample has to be bigger, and we rarely have the resources to do that. Okay. Anna, do you have a question, or are you just waiting? Okay. So, but I want to talk about, I don't know what word, instructor reflective memos, and you have a copy of that. And student ratings, and you probably, I don't know if I put a sample in there, but you probably already do that. You ask the students to rate the course. Now I'm going to ask you, do you ask the students to rate the course or to rate the instructor?
The course and all the methodology.
Okay, all right. Because very often we call them, you know, it's the student evaluating the instructor. And again, that's only a piece of what I call the course.
No, here we evaluate all the learning process. We try to evaluate the learning process. I am not sure that our survey is evaluate exactly the learning process, but the intentionality is to evaluate the learning process. Not only the teacher, the work,
Right.
Actually has
the
four sections.
self-knowledge of the courses, his attitude, the teacher's attitude, many aspects.
Right.
And also we have a self evaluation at the end of the semester.
As an instructor?
Yes.
Okay, that's what this instructor reflect memo is. So this is the students evaluating the course. This is the instructor thinking about what went on. And it's a self-assessment of what went on. And we developed one, which, oh, enough of those. Okay. You have a copy of that. At the end of the course, we asked the instructor to think about what went on in the course. And we give them very specific questions. And here they are. What were the learning outcomes for your course? Okay, so what is that saying to the instructor? I bet it has some learning outcomes. I bet they better be clear to, okay. So what are the learning outcomes for the course? And what evidence do you have that students have achieved them? Secondly, what teaching and learning methods have you tried in this course this time? And what evidence do you have that they were successful? 3, what learning assessments have you used? What learning assessment methods have you used, and what evidence do you have that they were successful? 4, what will you do differently the next time? And then we have one in there, to whom have you forwarded this memo? Because now we want instructors to be talking to each other about teaching, and particularly they should send their reflections to the teacher that the students had before you, so they will know what happened in your course because they sent you the students, and to the students to whom you're sending this to the instructor to whom you're sending the students. Now what happens to reflective memos? The instructors fill them out, and it's usually a narrative of about 4 to 6 pages. It goes to the, well, we call him the deputy department head, the assistant department head. Because at MIT, in our department, the deputy department head is the person who is responsible for curriculum and teaching in the program. So they go to him. And it's a him, I think it's a her now. Anyway, they go to that person. They do not go to the department head, to the chair, department chair. And the reason for that is that the department chair is the person who's responsible for promotion, for salary increases, for hiring and firing. They don't go to that person because we want this reflective memo to be something that's going to help them to improve. So faculty need to feel very safe about saying, I tried this and it didn't work. They didn't get it. And in fact, I've read it, and let me give you an example. And then after that, so what happens next? They go to the assistant department head. The assistant department head meets with every instructor, and they have a conversation about teaching. They always have conversations about research in the department, but this is a chance for them to have a conversation about the teaching and learning that went on. And then there at MIT, no longer because I'm not there full time, but when I was there full time, all those reflective memos would come to me. And then I would read them all and try to look for trends across the department. Are we using more innovative teaching methods? What are we doing with assessment? Are students reaching the learning outcomes? And so on, looking for patterns that way. So I would read things, now this is possible if you have a small department. If you have 100 faculty members, or a faculty member teaches 4 courses every semester, that's a burden to put on them, or it could be. Okay? It's not the case at MIT. And I'm almost embarrassed to tell you what the teaching load is at MIT. They don't teach 4 courses a semester. So they're able to do this. So I would read things like, last year when I was teaching, this was a structures class, when I was teaching beam theory, beam, in the structures, when I was teaching beam theory, students really did not get it. They did not understand at all. So this time, or I went to talk to another structures instructor, and he gave me some suggestions about what I might do, and I did these demonstrations, and we planned these, and just really revised it. And the students didn't get it. So it was like 2 years in a row you've kind of failed. So it made me chuckle a little bit, that he was not afraid to say, I tried something different than yours. So, but he didn't give up. He said, next year this is what I'm going to try. No, it was next year because they only taught the course once a year. So next year I'm going to try this. So it's that kind of process of improvement. So you have the format there.
Doris, at ICESI, we have a self-evaluation tool for teacher, and the teacher has to send the syllabus and the evaluation to the department for store.
And they keep them there in the department. Yeah.
You
Yeah,
keep in
good.
the department, and the department chief talk about the teacher, about the results of the
Okay.
evaluation, and give feedback.
Is the department chief the same person who does promotion and tenure and salary increases? Okay, good. Good. It's good to keep those separate.
No.
Is it possible for me to get a copy of that form?
Yeah, for sure.
That would be great. I'd love to see that.
Pues, Alessandro, pues yo le pido a Milena una...
Oh, we have to do it right now. I love this class. I just do it right a minute, put it in the Dropbox. In the Dropbox, in 5 minutes.
I think I actually have one here on my computer.
You have one. It's in the Dropbox. Thank you. And actually, all right, you do that so you know that. Okay. Here's an example of the student rating course evaluation form. And you have a course evaluation form?
Yes.
I didn't give you one in the, did I give you one in the, if I gave you one, it was probably not from MIT, but from the school where I just graduated, from the Blessed Edmund Rice School for Pastoral Theology. And you know what? It looks a lot like this. And guess why? I designed their forms as well. A couple of things to note about, remember I said MIT has its own language. When you see here the subject, that means the course. MIT uses the word course to mean the program. So the program in aerospace engineering is course 16. And the courses in that program area are called subjects. So this is really the course evaluation and where it says subject. So here are 5-point scale, balanced, disagreement, Likert scale is a very common scale and one that I use quite a bit. So course learning objectives are clear, or course learning outcomes are clear. And I switch to. So what did we do? We separated out what belongs to the course and the instructor himself. Is the instructor an important part of the course? Absolutely. Probably the most important component of the course, but not the only important component. As a student, I can really feel successful and that a course was successful even even though I don't think the instructor was a terribly good instructor. So if everything about the course instruction evaluation was about the instructor, you would have a very poor overall evaluation. But I've been in courses where the instructor was not, and of course I'm very critical now, if I have to take a course and the instructor is really not a good instructor, and I've met them in my theology courses, where the instructor was not a good instructor. But in spite of that, I met the course learning outcomes because it motivated me to go and learn some things on my own, to look up other resources. Okay, so overall, the subject is good. Okay, so it's organized, stimulated my interest, and so on, and the course. Now, when you're asking items about any of them, whether it's instructor or subject.
It's quite similar to
It's quite similar?
yes.
Okay, good. Because you want to make sure that whatever you ask, you can do something about if the students say they strongly disagree with that statement. For example, I have seen on some course evaluations, my instructor has a sense of humor. Well, I would be the first one to agree that if I'm in a class and the instructor has a sense of humor, it's more pleasant to be there, and I might in fact learn more because I'm more relaxed, I'm enjoying that connection. But the problem becomes, what if the instructor doesn't have a good sense of humor? What is that poor instructor supposed to do? You know, are they going to practice stand-up comedy?
Learn some jokes before each class.
Start the class with a joke. And how bad is that? If someone doesn't have a natural sense of humor, just try telling a joke. It's terrible. So don't put that question on there. That's very different from my instructor shows enthusiasm. Now, some people are more naturally enthusiastic. But enthusiasm shows itself in a lot of ways. You have people who are so excited about their discipline. They might not even smile, but they are so intense, and you know so much. Their love for their subject just makes you love it as well. They have an enthusiasm about it that just shows in their devotion to the subject. They can do something about that. But be careful. If any of those, you can't fix it if it's broken. Don't put it in, don't hold them responsible for it. Okay? The other thing, again, because we were trying to introduce teaching and learning strategies and assessment strategies, we put them in because we wanted to know from the student's perspective, were they effective or not. So we just had it, it's not at all effective, it's generally ineffective, generally effective and very effective. So, you know, 2 negative, 2 positive. Or they don't use the strategy. And we listed the strategies that they could possibly be using for teaching and those they could be using for assessment. Now, the interesting thing about this is that we've had students who are going to assess things, you know, very effective and generally effective, and you know for sure the strategy is not even used. And then, of course, some open-ended questions. What was the best part of the course? How it should be improved, and so on. Who goes?
Doris, but you said yesterday that at MIT you are changing the culture of research teachers or teachers who work especially in research. Because now I think that somebody who is really involved with his research is not very good in teaching. And if
¿Tú crees que entenderían esta
she
definición?
gets some kind of this evaluation, maybe it's not going to be the best.
Yeah.
So,
But I am going to say that in the aerospace department, when we work through this curriculum design and the CDIO approach. We probably have the best researchers in aerospace engineering. They are excellent teachers. So it has not affected, they have adopted these, and we have some really very good. And for those instructors who are really researchers who do poorly on these, this is where we turn around and we say, all right, how can we help you? And the idea is,
Again,
they don't have to learn, they don't have to do all of this, but maybe they need to improve their lectures. How can we help you to improve your lectures?
that's very important.
And throughout this process, this faculty meets every day for lunch on Wednesdays. And in the very beginning, the topics at lunchtime were teaching, learning, and assessment topics. In the last few years, they've moved more toward opportunities for the faculty to share their research. But it was not that at the beginning, when it probably was department head. Okay. This is what we talked about at lunchtime.
Dolores, the self-assessment form is already in the Dropbox.
Sí, thank you. Gracias.
Doris, excuse me.
Sí.
Gonzalo, es que yo creo que probablemente el lunes ya estaremos con la angustia de que va a arrancar el semestre. Lo que quiero decir es que para nosotros la gran lección es que este seminario tiene que ser un ejercicio de reflexión permanente de aquí en para realmente...
Yo estoy anotando tareas.
Ah, bueno, listo.
Sí, sí.
No,
el que estén en el Dropbox no sirve para nada, porque pueden quedar allá.
Sí, es que
las tareas son para tener actividades, para definir actividades,
definir
plan de trabajo,
formalmente un
una
espacio
actividad
de
es un plan de
trabajo.
trabajo y definir un espacio de trabajo. Y yo creo que con este empujón que nos ha dado Doris, yo creo que el espacio de trabajo va a ser mucho más productivo. Aquí lo que yo esperaba un poco es tener un espacio improductivo, que gastamos toda la tarde un viernes, ahí a veces salimos sin nada, es horrible. De acuerdo, ahora estamos...
And the thing is too, you may look at this and say, I can't believe you have all these assessment tools, this department has all this, and where do we even start? Well, two things about that. When they started their curriculum process, they hired me for their department, for their programs, and gave me the job of developing the assessment strategies. Now, I don't even want to tell you. We have a teaching learning center at MIT, but it is responsible for the entire university. And this was Ed Crawley, who was department head, first author of the book, who felt if he was going to try to do this big curriculum reform, he needed more resources than he could get from the department. So I don't even want to tell you that I hesitated. He hired me because I am, before my expertise in assessment, he hired another person for expertise in teaching and learning. So at that time, and we were both full-time, so at that time we had more resources in our department than the university had for the whole university. We had more than the teaching and learning center. Now it's not the case because they added staff to the teaching and learning center. But where do you start? Just to say, did I do all that the first month I was there? No. My first test, they had already started instructor reflective memos. So my first task was to read them all from the previous 2 years and try to get a sense of where the department was going and to look at the form and maybe adjust it a little bit. But my first big task was this. And again, they had one from the university. We'll see this a little bit more tomorrow. But the questions were not all appropriate. But the biggest problem was the feedback. They didn't get the results back for almost a whole year. It was not any use to them for the next time they were getting that course ready. So, in the meantime, they asked a student group to take over the assessment. And the student group developed its own form. So now they were giving out 2 forms, asking the students to complete essentially the same information. Well, that alone is, students are going to fill them out. Right? So we got permission from the university to design our own form and use our own form and not use the university one. And we put in a system so that we had the data summarized and ready to go back to the instructors even before they had submitted grades. And it was that fast. They didn't get them until they submitted grades, but they were ready. So they had them before the beginning of the next semester in that grade. So we worked with those 2 instruments for a long time. And only gradually did we look at some of the other things, and some of the other instruments we'll look at tomorrow for curriculum evaluation. And it was probably only after a couple of years that we actually had the rubrics for oral presentation, and we used the oral and the teamwork. And some of those other rubrics, I designed them, but they're not being used. They were never really introduced into the program. All right, you've been wonderful. I'm going to show you the summary that I'm not going to give you. This is a kind of a variation of the money cards. It's a summary that I like to use, and I use often, and I just call it the 3-2-1. And it could be 3 of anything and 2 of anything and 1 of these. And it's just a variation rather than saying, give me 3 reasons for this and 3 of those and 3 of those. It's like 3. And it's usually, and this is how I usually do it. Give me, I would have you fill it out. 3 ideas that you learned about assessing student learning and evaluating courses. Okay? 2 questions, 2 practices you still have questions about, and 1 action, 1 step you're going to take related to that. And that step could be, I'm going to look up some references about it. I'm going to read a little bit more about it. Okay? But it's a 3-2-1, nice informal assessment. You have been wonderful, as always. Thank you again. And tomorrow I'm going to let you give me a test. I set myself 1 learning outcome for this week, and that was, could I call each of you by name? So I'm going to practice again tonight with my list of names, and I will let you give me an assessment tomorrow to see if I can call you by name.